I'm Whitney Lackenbauer. I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair in the study of Canadian North in the School for the Study of Canada at Trent University. And this is a topic I'm passionate about. I've been studying since I was an undergraduate student and became an honorary member of the National Aboriginal Veterans Association, Odawa Circle, back in 1996. Well, more than 7,000 First Nations people served in the First and Second World Wars and the Korean War. And that number is even higher when you include Métis and Inuit service personnel, which leads to estimates of about 12,000 Indigenous people who served in the Canadian Armed Forces during the 20th century. But after the World Wars ended, Indigenous service was often overlooked and underappreciated. So Indigenous veterans led several important movements in the second half of the 20th century to have their contributions acknowledged. The first National Aboriginal Veterans Day was observed in Winnipeg on November 8, 1994, and since then Indigenous Veterans Day has spread and is now observed all across Canada. On Remembrance Day, we reflect and we remember all the Canadians who lost their lives in military service and those whose lives were forever changed. We hold their loved ones, families, and communities in our hearts. And this is not about celebrating war. It is about emphasizing the memory of fallen soldiers, about the tragic human costs of war. And it is a day to reflect and acknowledge the courage and sacrifice of those who have served our country, and in turn to acknowledge our responsibility to work for the peace that they fought hard to achieve and to preserve. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action highlight the importance of commemorating the contributions of Indigenous people to Canada's history, and how honoring past contributions helps to open up new and exciting possibilities for a future in which Indigenous peoples take their rightful place in Canada's history as founding nations who have made and continue to make strong and unique contributions to our country. This includes proud histories of military service. So as Canadians take steps on our shared journey of reconciliation, I think it's really appropriate to have a distinct day when we remember and acknowledge all the Indigenous people who have served and protected Canada across generations. And it encourages us to celebrate the stories of leadership and dedication exemplified by Indigenous veterans like Francis Pegamagabo, Henry Norwest, Edith Anderson Montour, Tommy Prince, Debbie Eisen, JJ and Alex Van Bibber, David Nasagalowak, and Samuel Palak Huyer, to name but a few. And we can observe how, despite barriers to accessing veterans benefits, enduring continued prejudice and discrimination, and their long struggle for recognition, Indigenous veterans now receive the recognition and commemoration that they so richly deserve.
I started off my career in the Brave program, which was in BC in Esquimalt, and it was with all Indigenous people all over Canada. So when it comes to storytelling, as an Indigenous veteran, I think storytelling is the way we keep engaging with not just our Indigenous veterans and Indigenous soldiers, but to engage a kind of dialogue with non-Indigenous people serving the country, what it means to be Indigenous in Canada, and sometimes having to explain that there's going to be some form of uncomfortability. But I also think that the best storytelling that has occurred has been around when you're in the field and you're, knee deep in mud, you're in a trench with your buddy, and you're just trying to talk, keep each other awake because it's been a couple of days since you got a good night's sleep. And you're talking about home, and then you realize that home is kind of similar to everybody that experience what the military is like. And having those discussions is really important to not just discuss hardships, but the fun and the grueling times that seemed hard at the time, but you could laugh about them now. Talking about certain Indigenous heroes like Francis Pegamagabo or Tommy Prince, and yes, those are amazing human beings and amazing Indigenous leaders and Indigenous veterans, and we don't talk about the everyday Indigenous person who speaks up and says, well, I want to serve my country even though this country was not kind to my community or my people. I recognize that I have a duty to my country to help, create equality and an equitable lifestyle. I would say one of the key aspects in military training is that Indigenous people have contributed a lot, not just to the military, not just to Canada, but to everybody's everyday life. I think what's really important about that is our way of storytelling, and that importance of storytelling has brought more and more people together and more people to create dialogue on the Indigenous veterans and how historically Indigenous veterans were treated and how in the future Indigenous veterans are going to be moving forward. So for me, having a day for Indigenous Veterans Day is extremely important to not just recognize Indigenous veterans who served our country in the past, but to give kind of us hope, saying we recognize you as Indigenous person serving our country. And even though historically we have, in Canada, we have done some wrongs to Indigenous people, this day is to recognize and to acknowledge you, to say that you're not alone, you're heard, and that you're understood, and that we are here to support you.